Can't hear the music now, but it's not a problem. Steve, we're live, don't worry.
Unmute. Good to go. Fine. Hey, Gary, good evening.
Good evening all, and welcome to our IET webinar hosted tonight by the IET Devon and Cornwall Local Network. Our Devon and Cornwall Local Network Chairman, Dr. Gary Lester, was really hoping to introduce his webinar tonight as he's arranged it and it falls within his passion for aero and aerospace. Gary unfortunately has bandwidth of about 1 bit a week, so during our test run it became clear that he would not be able to host. But rest assured, Gary sends his regards to all and will be listening in. My name is Adrian Miles and I'm Vice Chair of the Devon and Cornwall Local Network, and it's my particular pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Dr. Steve Wright. Our webinar tonight is titled Drones, Software and Systems to Make a Brick Fly. So if you're expecting something different, you might well be in the wrong webinar. And talking about places, Steve is joining us from a break he has taken on a remote Scottish island. So if we do have the occasional dropout, please bear with us as he should reconnect fairly quickly. This is the first webinar that our Devon and Cornwall Local Network have hosted. So please also bear with us as we get to grips with online events. It's so good to see 270 people with us tonight, so that's good news. A little bit about our speaker tonight. Dr. Steve Wright is currently a Senior Research Fellow of Aerospace Engineering at the University of the West of England. This is following 25 years as a Software, Electronics and Systems Engineer at Rolls-Royce, ST Microelectronics and Airbus. During Steve's career, he has contributed to commercial aircraft, including the Airbus 320, 330, 340, 380, and A400 and 350, and Boeing series planes from 747 to 777. Steve's doctorate, investigative verification of microprocessor instruction sets, and Steve now lectures and conducts research into avionics and aircraft systems, particularly in the field of UAVs. Steve has now founded the Unmanned Flight Laboratory at the UWE, developing UAV technologies for a variety of industrial customers. And from Steve's abstract, love them or hate them, drones now seem to be everywhere. They are different from the aircraft that we are used to. They look different, they fly differently, they cost a lot less, and in fact, the familiar multi-copters that we see are now just a part of what is achievable. The secret is electronics and software, power and control systems. And in this talk, Dr. Steve Wright will present the multiple technologies that make them possible. Dr. Wright will also give an update on the latest developments from the last few months at the University of the West of England, pushing these capabilities further to create the drones of the future. Interestingly, Steve has spent 25 years in conventional large-scale commercial aerospace and is now downsized to a smaller and unconventional sector, drones, which is sort of the opposite way that you might expect other people to go. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker tonight, Dr. Steve Wright. Over to you, Steve.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Adrian. And thank you very much for coming. 270 people, that's extraordinary. I've done many a live talk, but this is the first time I've done a webinar. So yeah, interesting times indeed, very grateful for the IT. So good evening, hello, I'm Dr. Steve Wright. There's a lot of Steve Wrights in the world, but this particular one is an aerospace engineer, effectively a software and systems and electronics engineer who happens to have spent his entire career in aerospace. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I graduated in 1989 and I started off working at Rolls-Royce. Excuse me, I'm just going to start the stopwatch so I can keep with time. And started at Rolls-Royce, and after a brief sabbatical in the electronics industry at the end of the millennium, I went to Rolls-Royce, to Airbus, and I was heavily involved with all the glory days projects. As I look back at them now, these very large aircraft. The one that everybody talks about is the A380. But also the large project that went on after that, the A350 and whatnot. So part of the midlife crisis, I went back to university to do my doctorate, hit 40, and that was actually in computer science and formal methods, which is associated with aerospace and proof and whatnot. And 6 years ago, I washed up on the shore of the second half of my career at the University of West of England. And so this is where things got really interesting for me, because I moved from the very large to the very small. And one of the reasons I moved on from Airbus was large aircraft, very, very interesting. But this whole new wave that came along a few years ago really is something special. So I want to tell you about what makes these kinds of aircraft interesting and what the technologies are that make them possible. So in fact, this is a really appropriate talk for the IET, because one of the things I always joke about is that it's sort of drones as we see them. You probably see this from when you see one flying, a sort of an insult to the aerodynamics engineer. So and we'll find out why tonight. So I'm going to talk about some of the technologies that underpin all this, because that will also set the scene for the sort of story that I want to tell you, particularly about some interesting aircraft and drones that we've been building at the University of West of England in Bristol. Really exciting times, and that will give some background as to all the interesting things and problems we had, frankly, in this particular project and how we've moved on through them. So interesting times indeed. So one of the things I just wanted to tell you about is, in fact, here I am, as you can see from the backdrop, I'm actually in the Orkney Islands off the north of Scotland. So I'm at the end of a very, very long piece of copper in this absolutely spectacularly romantic cottage by the sea. So I hope we won't have too many dropouts tonight, but just bear with me if that does happen. Julie's on standby to tell me if there's a problem, and I can reconnect very quickly, because this place is full of engineering. Here's me with my young apprentice doing some more electrical engineering, some renewables there. This is in fact just about 20 meters that way outside in the garden. So fun times indeed. So the next video, that's all about me.
Steve, you're frozen. You're back, thank you.
Great, we're back. Yes, we might have a few of those, so bear with us. Apologies. So the question is, and please go into the chat box here. Who's seen a drone? I mean, anybody who hasn't been living in a cellar for the last 15 years has surely seen a drone whirring overhead, particularly something like this, which is a typical drone. That's probably the most popular drone on the planet. In fact, it's a thing called a DJI Phantom. Here's another interesting one. Who's flown a drone? You might have had a quick go at pushing the sticks of a drone around the living room for something bought at Christmas. And here's where the fun starts. Who's built a drone? It's surprisingly easy to do. And as you can see from my picture there, to build a drone is to crash a drone. It's one of those rites of passage that everybody's gone through. So exciting times. And let's just see. So please, tell us in the chat box what your level of experience is. We're really, really interested, because also I'm very interested to hear about what angle of drones and UAVs you're interested in. Are you interested in the technology itself, the machines? And that's certainly where I started out, very interested in how do they work, what do they do? But as I say, the next bit is who's more interested in the applications, in the missions? Because one of the things I want to talk about tonight is both of those, really, and effectively, and the two interact, of course, because the machine expands what sort of mission and capability we can perform on a given day. So let's just have a quick look. Have we got any? Julie, tell us what sort of comments have we got? Have people coming back with the description of their experience?
Yeah, someone's flown an indoor micro drone but would like to progress.
Excellent.
Fly and build and write software for controlling flight. I go back to air-cooled prop drones in the 1960s. We had an issue that we couldn't see your pictures for a while, but they're now up.
It's catching up. Apologies.
Yeah, so someone's trying to build a UAV.
Excellent.
Thanks for the talk. I'm an EICA design engineer. I own and pilot a 3D printed FPV drone I built. Sorry if I mispronounced any of this stuff. So fantastic. Yeah, lots of comments here.
Wonderful. So a whole range, everybody from wondering where to start through to, people who probably know more about it than I do. It's excellent. Thank you very much. That's just the sort of spread of experience that I've typically come across in my career so far in this world. And I have to say, it is an absolute golden age. And I'm going to be talking about this in a second. For somebody who spent years and years working in conventional aerospace, where you couldn't really get a huge amount done because, it cost £1 million to get out of bed at Airbus, through to we've just got these wonders that we can build our own vehicles and write our own software now, with all the hard bits done for us, frankly. So let's have a look at some of those technologies in a minute. So this is the sort of thing that I do at the moment. I'm up at the University of West of England, as I say, in Bristol. And we're typically working in the TRL, the technology readiness level, of about four to 6. So in other words, we're not working on pie in the sky stuff. We're working on semi-mature technology demonstrators, lab brass boards and whatnot. And so here you can see some of the great fun projects we've been involved in. And as you can see also, both a mixture of commercial and military applications. And that's a really interesting point, actually, because we're at quite an interesting crossroads in the technology these days, in that I always describe it as here in 2020, we're in 1920, and where we haven't yet diverged so much between the military equipment and the civil equipment. And we can talk about that in a minute. So here's some of the examples of the things we've done. So here's a good example up there, MBDA. They came along one day and asked us to do this crazy high acceleration multi-copter. And it was essentially trying to find out how fast can you make this thing accelerate. We've done a fixed wing project as well, and a rather spectacular project for a technology demonstrator that you may be seeing at a trade show near you in the next few years. Interesting times. A bit close to home, the university itself has backed us doing various projects. This one was a very interesting project. The spec was purely to make it look pretty. And also one of the things I've discovered is UAVs are just perfect for getting young people and students fired up about aerospace systems, programming, propulsion, electrical systems, everything. It really is just like dangling wonderful toys in front of them. And so, in fact, we built a drone that was particularly built for undergraduate. It had to be quite undergraduate proof, which meant it had to bury itself in the ceiling without damaging the ceiling. So we're also working at the moment on a very interesting project for the EU, looking at solar farms. We're doing a very interesting integration exercise with a special sensor being developed by a Spanish company. So the interesting point here is made just in the previous slide is there's still opportunity for one set of technologies to fit across a whole range of applications. So, and because of that, and as I say, this is why it's quite an appropriate talk for the IET. I'm an IET myself, I should mention. And so rather than aeronautics, in many ways, a lot of people describe this new world as aerial robotics. So what we've got there in the top left corner, that's an Inspire, DJI Inspire. And that's a typical workhorse that an airborne photographer, a professional photographer might use. Very reliable, probably costs you about 10,000 quid. But we're deriving much more exotic aircraft from that. So we're looking at what's going to come along in the next 10 years. And that can be anything here. So what we've got down here is simply an off-the-shelf model airframe bought for about 50 quid, but stuffed with every new kind of avionics that we could drum up. And that was to investigate long duration flight and really just navigation early days. And this particular drone here was our first attempt at stuffing artificial intelligence accelerator compute power onto a drone. And that's going to be a huge deal in the future. And it's something I want to mention later. So one of the things I really want to talk about, as I say, is drone tech, because people keep asking me, so what's happened? You know, nobody's invented an anti-gravity machine. So what's changed between about the millennium, where, you know, these things sort of existed, and now where they're just absolutely everywhere? What are the technologies that made it all happen? So firstly, let's think about the type of vehicles there are. So as I say, we've got quite sophisticated vehicles. That costs you about 10,000 quid. Then we can go down to about 250 quid. And that actually, it all looks very black and Gucci and everything. But in fact, that's a Parrot AR drone, which is really useful for teaching. In fact, the first 2 years of using drones for teaching, I used these vehicles. Very nice piece of kit. And then we can go down to these wonderful bits of kit. And now this is a real shame, because if this was a live presentation, this is where I do my little party piece of flying one of these things around the room. Suffice it to say that we've got, for about £40, we've got a vehicle there which is completely unskilled. It can hover by itself, and I only have to steer it. I don't have to fly it. So that's the sort of level of technology and the range of technology we've got. So what makes that technology possible? And so the first thing to think about is, as I say, no one's invented an anti-gravity machine. Well, really, all that's happened is a whole series of technologies have inched forward along their cost and performance curves. So we're still using batteries, but we're using a new generation of batteries, lithium polymer batteries, which have been around for a long, long time. But now suddenly they've got a lot cheaper. The energy densities have gone up and whatnot. Similarly, cameras, open source software, good old GitHub. And if I had to say which technology has been the enabler of all this, as I say, it's a convergence, but pretty much mobile phones has been largely what has accelerated and particularly reduced the cost of the various technologies that I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides. So it's probably the mobile phone, and to a lesser extent, but more and more now, is electric vehicles, electric cars. So here's the sort of wonderful range of goodies that I, Steve Wright, as an electronics and systems engineer, have gleefully inherited from all these other areas, you know, and these different industries that have applied economies of scale that just could not have possibly occurred anywhere else within the industry itself, that is. We just haven't got the numbers for that yet. So let's look at some of the things I've got there. 32-bit microprocessors, so only 32-bit. So 64, not really yet. But the big one of these accelerometers, 6-axis accelerometers, generally based on micromechanical systems. So I'm sure there's lots of people in the audience tonight familiar with accelerometers based on laser gyroscope type concepts. These are much, much simpler, not as high performance, but good enough. And I think that's perhaps one of the words and one of the phrases that really sums up how drone technology works. It's good enough to make the thing work and make it fly. We've got crazy things like barometers that can tell the difference between 30 centimeters change in altitude. And the whole thing held together with open source software and cameras and all the things that we just take for granted in the smartphone age. So this is an IEE talk. So an IET, sorry, we are now. And this is an IET talk. And so there'll be lots of people out there who'll be quite interested in the deep down the processor inside. So here's a typical day on the farm. This is an autopilot from a drone. And as you can see, it's called a Pixhawk. And in fact, ironically, the Pixhawk was pretty much the standard drone autopilot about 2 to 3 years ago. And it shows the pace of development that's going on when that's pretty much obsolete now, in that we've got pretty much the same functionality, but much, much cheaper and on a smaller footprint as well. But here's some of the spec we've got. So it's an ARM Cortex A8. I mentioned earlier, 32-bit machine, only a gig. So in fact, you know, it's not exactly deep thought, is it? It's pretty old hat. It's pretty long in the tooth compared to a high-end mobile phone like my machine here. And so we're looking there at typically, well, that's what you find in a smartphone from about.
Steve, you're frozen.
Steve, you might want to turn off the video of you presenting and just have your voice in the slides. I think, as somebody suggested, that might save a lot of bandwidth as well.
Welcome back.
Apologies, folks, and many thanks to Julie for the warning. Yeah, as Adrian pointed out, maybe I should stop the video for the moment. If it still breaks up, I'll stick with it for the moment. If we lose track again, I'll switch off the video. Let's have a go. So yes, that's our microprocessor. So the other half of it is the microprocessor is the glue in the middle, doing the control and doing the thinking. But that would be nothing without power. And there's a few parts to that. We've got lithium polymer batteries, which, as we well know, have been around for a while now, decades really, but they've really come down in price, and their stability and their energy densities are going through the roof. And that's driven by a combination of smartphones.
You've gone again, Steve.
Am I back?
You're back. Welcome back.
Right, we'll lose the video. Cheerio, see you later. We'll try it later for the questions. But never mind. I hope that will sort things out. Yes. So we've got lithium polymer batteries. We've got electronic controllers. So in other words, large MOSFETs. So I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience nodding happily about that. And then at the end of the power chain, we've got this high torque brushless motors. So this is a technology that I remember I was told about as an undergraduate. This is a brand new concept, effectively commutated magnetic field. And we were and the enabling technology for that was high speed low cost 8-bit microprocessors in order to do that commutation very, very effectively. And so that's moved completely into the mainstream now. And it really is helping us. And then we need the communications to whisper sweet nothings from the ground to the vehicle and back again. And as you can see again, we've got this wonderful choice of standard communication systems that are just available off the shelf. They're matured, they're cheap, and they work. The interesting point about it is, and there'll probably be questions about this later, is yes, but how reliable are they? And as I say, good enough, but good enough for what? And that's a really interesting question in itself. And it's in fact a whole new talk. I'm not going to touch on it tonight. So sure enough, yeah, we've got good old software again. This is the IT. We love software. I know I do. It's certainly paid the rent for 3 decades now. And so as you can see, again, these are all bits of technology that people are familiar with in the consumer space, you know, Linux operating systems, real-time operating systems, but not safety critical. The programming languages are typically consumer ones. So we're looking at C, C++, C#. So for those people out there who are used to dealing with ADA, DO178C certified code and things like that, that's quite an eye-opener. And in fact, as I say, there's a huge leap between the technology that we have here and the level of technology in the aircraft that I was used to for all those years. So it's been a very, very interesting one. And the discussion of that gap is another talk that I have, and it's a very, very useful one to have. But that's the technology. But one of the things that I really like about this is that it's opened up a whole new branch of aerospace. In other words, we're not competing, we're not trying to displace A320s and Boeing 747s out of the market. What we're doing instead is developing a whole new niche, a whole new market niche that was absolutely unattainable before, absolutely impossible. So, and I would argue that the 2 qualities that these technologies have brought to that market, firstly, flexibility. In other words, to do the sort of missions and airframes that you just couldn't imagine before using conventional, you know, gas turbine and large scale avionics systems. So now I hope that the bandwidth will take it. But I've got a little video there to give you a demonstration. And here's one of my assistants. Throw launch straight into a completely autonomous mission between GPS waypoints. Julie, could you confirm, did that video work okay?
Yes, I can see a jerky picture of a drone moving across the screen.
Great stuff. So that is a typical sort of flexibility that we've got now for drones. So yes, somebody from Leonardo helicopters, try and do that with a conventional helicopter and see how far you get, etc. It's always the joke. And the other interesting aspect of this is performance as well. And although top speeds aren't necessarily particularly high, of the order of sort of 100 miles per hour, the classic, the really interesting parameter that we absolutely have in spades is acceleration. So I mentioned earlier about that project we did for MBDA, and the basic project was how fast an acceleration can you pull? And this is what we built for them. So here's a sort of acceleration, blasting out what we would call a high-speed punch-out. And that was the sort of testing we were doing on campus before that sort of thing was completely shut down by regulations. We have to go to other places now. Julie, did that come through as well?
Yes, it did.
Excellent, very interesting. So it looks pretty hairy, and it is. So to give you some numbers there, as an engineer, looking at the black box data, the log data that we had downloaded after those maneuvers, we were pulling about 8.5 Gs continuously there. So to put that in context, that was 0 to 60 in about 900 milliseconds, which, so to put that in context again, is a poor asthmatic Formula One car can just about pull 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. So we're about twice as fast. And the other aspect about that is the concept of jerk motion. In other words, the rate of change of acceleration, how quickly we can kick in acceleration is very, very high because we haven't got those huge momentums to build up. So we're all familiar with sitting on an aircraft and we hear the engines wind up over a period of a couple of seconds. We can do that in tens of milliseconds now. And that gives these phenomenal jerk motion numbers. So, yeah, that's great stunt, Steve. Very interesting, very nice. I'm sure MBDA were very, very impressed. But what was it actually useful for? So this is really interesting now because we're on a long expanding roadmap. And just as I say, we're in 1920, where the number of applications is expanding all the time. So this is where we've been for the last few years, probably viewing things. So typically, you know, we're looking at reconnaissance, aerial photography is the big one. Suddenly we can do large scale aerial photography for costs that were just absolutely impossible using conventional aerospace before. And so the next thing we're moving towards, I would argue now, is standoff interaction. In other words, we're starting to do things, but not getting too close. So typically we're looking at cleaning things and painting things at the moment. So we're moving closer and closer in. And by the same token, the viewing applications are getting closer in. In other words, we're moving from reconnaissance to surveillance to inspection. So in other words, we're moving from hundreds of meters away to tens of meters to sub 1 meter now, and the sort of inspection that we'd like to do. So we're doing standoff interaction. So where's it going to go in the future? Well, if I could answer that one definitively, I'd be not dialing in from the Orkney Islands. I'd be dialing in from my private yacht, obviously. But the sort of things that we can already see coming along are close-in interaction, like delivery. So that's where we're moving in, we're having to release a product and then move safely away again. And people are starting to do that already. The issues aren't technical, as I'm sure you're probably aware. They're mostly regulatory. But regulatory is technical in this business because it generally boils down to safety and how we can guarantee those correct levels of safety. And so delivery, collection, placement. So, and here's the particularly interesting one at the bottom there. What's going on in that bottom picture? People have a guess into the chat by all means. Can anybody guess what that picture is all about? That yeah, nefarious, somebody said. Bang on. That drone was captured during the battle for Mosul. That drone was being used to drop hand grenades on Iraqi forces, but during the shootout for Mosul in 2017. And that is something we're seeing all the time, is low-level remote effects delivery, to use the jargon. And as you can see, they're the same thing. So the other thing that's getting really interesting, this is blatantly leading through to the second half of my talk, talking about airframes. And one of the things that all this capability gives us is the ability to make all these really interesting airframes that were just not practical before. So here was a project we did 2 years ago now. Again, it was an MBDA project, and we went from a whiteboard literally to a flight test and a lab demonstration to a concept of future battlefield type equipment using these crazy airframes, which would be absolutely impossible to regulate and certify in anything except an unmanned military environment. So that's the sort of unheard of and unseen equipment that we can now explore. And so with the example of this I want to take you through to is another strange airframe, and this is actually part of the project that's playing out now. And in fact, literally today, before I came on today, I was just having a discussion with my excellent assistant on the project for this. So what we've got here is two old breeze blocks lying on the floor. And as you can see, the one on the left looks a little bit strange. What's going on there? It's a novel airframe. Just try and move that forward. What were we trying to do here? Well, essentially, we're trying to insert monitoring equipment into brownfield locations. In other words, where there's bricks and things lying around, and we want to insert that. Now, the obvious thing is the military. This isn't actually the military. We're looking at monitoring wildlife in a place of the world. Shall we say that the sort of people that our funder is dealing with, we're dealing with people who do not say please and thank you. And so they need to insert this equipment in order to monitor the wildlife in a completely surreptitious fashion, and more importantly, extract it again, because of course you don't want to leave any giveaway equipment in the field after the mission. So how do we do that? Well, firstly, let's think about the mission. Just trying to, good. Sorry, I was just having a bit of a configuration issue there. So yes, we thought about the mission. So we knew that it was easy to insert a monitoring device. We can drop it out of an aeroplane. It's getting it back again, which is the gotcha, of course. So we said, right, let's put the whole thing in. We'll land the UAV and it will become the monitoring station, at which point we're going to have to disguise the vehicle. And we chose brick because, well, it's square, isn't it? It's a start, and it's the sort of area that the customer was interested in bugging, frankly. So how do we go about that? So you can imagine there's all sorts of pros and cons with this strange concept. On the one hand, we don't have to do the pickup, and it probably doesn't take much imagination to realize it's an extremely difficult requirement to go and find a small monitoring device that's been dropped by another party at some point in the past, rendezvous it and collect it without being seen. The number of flights is only there and back instead of there, back, and then the collection mission as well. So there's all sorts of good things there. And also, by definition, the power that we need for our monitoring and communication systems is all integrated with the airframe. The amount of energy it takes to do the monitoring is a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of energy we've got available to fly the actual aircraft. Nothing comes for free. So firstly, we're looking at a fairly big payload. So we're going to have to disguise it, where potentially before it would be easier to disguise. And also we're going to have to optimize the vehicle for the disguise itself, for the on-station phase, for the time it was on the ground, rather than flight. So we were going to have to overcome those rather unfortunate compromises that we were going to have to make. So what did we build? We built a 2-kilogram hexacopter with rotors inside the box. So that's why we've got that crazy looking thing. And there it is. It's a brick. It's a breeze block, which opens the top and flies away. It's quite an entertaining idea. So as you can imagine, this was an absolutely fascinating exercise in systems engineering of having to squeeze these different requirements into the same vehicle. So we had effectively 3 threads going on in the development process. We had to think about the airframe and the propulsion. So as you can see here, we had to decide, right, how are we going to physically cram those rotors in? We were going to have to put some sort of communication and monitoring system in as well. So we've got what's usually called a companion computer there. And finally, we've got the disguise itself. How does that work? And how does that integrate with the airframe? And how do we actuate the disguise? So let's look at those 3 threads individually. So the airframe, as you can see, here's a useful shot on the left of the hexacopter. As you can see, it's narrow, and that's going to come back to haunt us in a minute.
Steve, you're frozen.
Great.
Welcome back.
Am I back? Many apologies, folks. So yes, we've got this airframe, 2 kilos, but 800 watts. So that's a lot, even for a drone. And we're going to talk about the reasons for that and the problems with that in a moment. The basic reason is those rotors are too small and they're in the wrong place. And so this was we had a hunch that these problems might be an issue, but they were worse than we expected. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So the systems, as you can say, it's a typical day on the farm for modern electronics, where we've got all these beautiful pieces of kit that we can buy for the order of tens of pounds and integrate them very, very quickly. Open source software. So yeah, that is a Raspberry Pi that you can see there, both in the airborne system and the ground system. And we could write our own ground station GUI. We can use off-the-shelf ones, but this one was a particularly modified just for the mission itself. So that, yep, sure enough, that's written in Python. That was one of the bits that I did. And we had a communication system, relatively short range comms, 600 meters. So as you can imagine it though, it's not going to take much effort to drop in a different kind of modem, even through to a satellite link. Certainly already got 4G communications working there now. So that gives us pretty much global communications as long as we can see a transmitter tower. So we've got the systems there, which is, as you can see, fairly straightforward, really. It's nothing that any self-respecting IET member probably couldn't put together in their bedrooms during the winter, or during lockdown for that matter. So the disguise is perhaps the most entertaining part of the whole thing. And it was actually developed by a professional museum exhibit artist. Good at Lottie. Lottie is capable of making anything look like anything else. And it was absolutely great fun trying to make a brick that was made out of polystyrene and had a hinge top on. So many thanks to Lottie. And water resistant, as you can see, we had to be rainproof, roughly rainproof. So we had to paint that polystyrene and give that texture. And as you can see, the moss there. Moss is a great way of making an artificial thing look like a natural thing. It really fools the eye very, very quickly. And then we had to have, that all had to be integrated onto this lightweight frame as well. And weight really did become a huge issue in this project. So here's the question, did it work? And the answer is, kind of. We didn't feel like, but the customer said, amazing. We didn't think it would work at all. We were expecting just a heap of junk on a bench and nothing ever working. What did we have? We got the thing actually to fly in controlled flight and to unzip itself, land and zip itself up again. There it is, airborne. But we had problems galore, all of which we'd anticipated, but none of which we'd expected to scale so badly within the confines of the airframe that we were working on. So the rotors were too small. So we knew that we had a high disk loading, and we'd done various calculations on what the expected disk loading was. Disk loading is a huge issue with drones. I'm going to talk about it again in a second. That carapace, we couldn't get the weight out of it as much as we wanted to, and this is where that difficult design with those very close rotors, those centrally mounted rotors. In other words, we had a bit of mass, but all in the wrong place. So it was very unstable in roll because the mass was beyond the rotors. So there wasn't enough mechanical advantage in the rotors themselves. So we had all these issues, but they were worse than we expected. The big one particularly was vibration as well. We knew that there would be vibrational modes. It's one of the black arts of aerospace is making structures that are rigid enough that they don't suddenly start vibrating. So we had disk loading. And I don't know if people are familiar with that graph, but it will come to haunt your nightmares if you become a drones engineer, and please do. And this is what I call my rogues gallery of disk loading. The bottom line here is that there is a fundamental piece of physics going on that states that you need to make the rotor as big as possible and spread that weight. And the efficiency is pretty much inversely proportional to the disk loading. The roll stability, as you see, we flew a test article earlier and that was nice and stable. And we had a niggling suspicion that it was all going to be fine until we added that carapace and all those outrigger pieces of structure. And lo and behold, they were. So we managed to get weight out of the carapace and we managed to tune the PIDs, in other words, the proportional integral differential control laws within the avionics.
Steve, you're frozen.
Apologies, Julie. Am I back?
Welcome back.
Hello, and many apologies to the audience. Yes, the internet's having a bad night up here in Orkney. So yes, we pivoted quite late in the day to the archicopter, and that helped a lot as well. But essentially, we were trying to make these two conflicting problems meet in the middle. So we spent a lot of time poring over this, which is exactly what it looks like. It's a spectrum analysis of the vibrations feeding into the accelerometers of the control system. And it is an absolute testament to this amazing off-the-shelf open source software that we've got available, that we could actually do this. We could do vibration monitoring and look at the spectrum, and then we can insert software notch filters to try and discriminate against that. And we also put this foam baffling in as well, which obviously cost weight, but it was a got to have in order to get the vibration down. So the obvious question is did it work? And so this is a bit everybody's interested in. Surely is the video of it flying. So I wouldn't have brought you here tonight, surely, if it didn't work. So let's have a look. Now, I don't know if the noise is coming through to you here. As you can see, here it is. It's really bizarre. And there, look at that roll instability. And there it goes. It's unfolded itself. It takes off. And listen to that sound and the amount of energy that's been guzzled to keep that thing in the air. And there it goes, unstable in roll, and then it settles out. And then it cruises fairly well after takeoff. Problem was the amount of energy it was taking to keep that thing in the air was phenomenal. And so we took a new look and we said, gosh, well, that was rubbish. And the customer said, well, we think it's amazing. We didn't think you'd be able to get anything working, let alone something working. What should we do next? And we said, oh, it's easy. We'll redesign it with a different way. Totally new concept. Well, mostly concept. Yeah, there it is. It's a box with folding arms with rotors on the end. And as you can imagine, that solves all those problems of vibration, disk loading, mechanical advantage in roll. In other words, that is a really nice shaped drone now. In fact, it's better than most conventional drones because, as you can imagine, the mass is now concentrated in the middle. What we've done there is roll the whole thing up, or solved all those problems and roll those problems up into two problems in robotics and rigidity in those arms. And guess what? Those problems are now solved a year later. So we've got some demonstration for you here. Here's something going on in Eunice's bedroom, literally during lockdown. So here is the box, not yet painted. We'll just play, we'll run the play, I hope. Oh, there it goes. So it's as simple as that. Box cranks up, doesn't have to be very fast. This has to do it once at the beginning of takeoff, using off-the-shelf linear actuators under software control. So fairly straightforward. It's partly a problem in systems in robotics and actuation, but also, as you can see from that interesting honeycomb structure, and the art of building nice lightweight panels that don't vibrate as well. So that's part of the solution. And this is the bit that I like the best, is the arms. Here's the thing sitting on its bench, and it unfolds itself. One arm and then two arms. And it really is a thing of beauty. And needless to say, it can do all that in reverse and fold itself away again. So the interesting aspect of this design now is there's obviously a zillion different applications you could think for this, right through to, you know, we're thinking about painting it orange and using it as a flying weather station that could perch on a mountaintop or a rooftop. So exciting times ahead. And it has flown. It flew on Friday. There it is, taking off without the cover on yet. So literally, this really is work in progress as of today. We are hoping to fly it with the cover next week, and we will be flying it to the customer the week after. So we are immensely excited about this, the amount of work, sweat and tears that's gone into solving that myriad of problems in order to pull off this interesting party trick. Very, very exciting. And I'm looking forward to giving you an update again one day. So it looks like we're well on time. We're just coming up to 45 minutes. So I'm just going to round off now by thinking about the future. And so we've been talking about all these controllers. And here's the sort of thing that we've got at the moment, where we're taking networks. So we're doing systems integration rather than component development. We've got a flight control unit, off the shelf, open source, costs about £40. And what we tend to do is put a mission management unit, sometimes known as a companion computer. And that generally at the moment is, guess what, a Raspberry Pi. But more and more people are looking into integrating artificial accelerator devices and things like that into that companion computer. So exciting times ahead. And some of the research I've been doing as well is to go a level beyond that, where we're inserting artificial intelligence for the control systems. In other words, using simulation techniques. Look at that, we're actually using Unity there. I don't know if there's any games programmers out there tonight, but using that to simulate drones and then taking that up a level in order to use genetic algorithms to grow neural nets. And lo and behold, we've been able to grow a neural net capable of stabilizing the vehicle in simulation at the moment. And in fact, one of the things I'm thoroughly looking forward to next year is one of my students is doing the second year of his project to integrate that neural net into a real vehicle. So very exciting times. And the point about this is that this takes us up another level in being able to discover control laws for these crazy airframes that we can dream up now, and these wonderful technologies that allow us to have these fantastic toys and these options that just didn't exist at all. I call it artificial instinct as much as artificial intelligence at that level. So let me sum up. We're nicely on time. So what have we got here? I always say, all these technologies essentially let us have nice things. It's what this is all about. We've got these technologies which they haven't displaced the existing airframe technologies. They've created niches around them. And so a lot of people out there have dealt with drones, and a lot of people will also be familiar with the concept of eVTOL, which is electric manned flight as well. And so I've been heavily involved in those, and that deserves its own talk again. And so maybe another day. But it's all about software generally. It's about systems and software. Without those incredible FET-based electronic speed controllers, we wouldn't be able to switch that power. Without the microprocessors, we wouldn't be able to commutate those magnetic fields. And so in other words, these wonders allow us to create these completely unavailable technologies that were unimaginable before. So where's it going in the future? This is my hunch, is we're going to get these stranger drones. And so I'm very pleased to present my flying Brit tonight. But as you can see, the imagination suddenly can roam much more freely with these capabilities available. And the big one is we want to get closer into things. So that brings us back to that point about applications. So with that, I leave those 3 ideas in your mind. And as you can see, it is literally unfolding by the day. So as an ex-conventional aerospace engineer, as you can see from my enthusiasm, I am having an absolute whale of a time making these things work. It can be very frustrating at times, but we really are making something new. You know, in many ways, the genie is out of the bottle, whether you like it or not, but the technology exists. And so thank you very much for listening. And I'll be very keen to answer any questions if people can put them up. If I understand it correctly, Adrian, you're looking at the chat window in order to look at some questions. Is that right?
Yep, I've had a little look. So thank you, Steve, for that very informative and enlightening talk. And I'm sure many others will have learned much more about the complexities and technologies to make a brick fly, as I certainly have tonight. So, yep, we'll move to questions next. And firstly, yep, I think we've got 30 odd questions there at the moment. So right. I think we're going to allow, 30 minutes or so for questions? And I can pick a few out, but I'm mindful that you probably might have if you can see the questions and answers,
I'm looking at the chat box, which
is there a question and answers box next to it? So I'm happy to go through that.
Comments in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, right. In which case, there's some great comments in the chat about unless they can be safely certified. Thank you, Colin. They won't get very far out of the bottle, and you're absolutely right. That is a huge topic. One that I would love to talk to you about in a different talk. I've got a whole extra talk about that. And the eVTOL question is very interesting again, because in many ways there's sort of clear blue water between the drone space and the eVTOL space, particularly from, again, a certification point of view. So yeah, Adrian, lead on.
Okay, so I've got a number of questions here. And I'm not sure in what order or whatever to do these. The first question I've got here is, I'm designing a conceptual design of a UAV. How would you suggest to optimize the wing performance? Also, which flight controllers would you suggest?
Oh,
can you see this when I click on it? Can you see this on the screen?
Yes, that's Rovin. Yeah. Hello, Rovin.
From Rovin Perez, yeah.
Well, I've got 100 questions. Are you saying it's a winged drone? And if so, is it a vertical takeoff winged drone with rotors on? I'm going to make a few guesses, Rovin, and say, let's assume it was a quadcopter. The performance, it's the same thing with the wing performance. Wing performance is very different. Essentially, you're trying to get the wing loading down low for a vehicle like this, because we're still in a space where we're trying to make the thing efficient. And the big one for rotor performance, I cannot stress strongly enough how important it is to get that disc loading down. So those slides will be available. I thoroughly recommend looking at those slides about disc loading. But you need to get the size of your rotor as large as you possibly can. So Andrew Levy, I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Are you happy to go down through these?
Yeah, I'll just skim down. I'll pick some good ones.
Okay, that's perfect.
Breakdown of costs. Well, yes, there's always a good bill of materials. Suffice it to say, essentially most of the cost is in your batteries, your motors, and your electronic speed controllers. But generally, you can build your own drone for under £1,000, probably more like under £500. That's the sort of numbers you're looking at. Depends on the size. I remember one of my assistants once pointed out that drones, there seems to be a mutable law of nature that drones seem to cost £100 a pound, which I thought was a very useful one. Let's have a look. How would you find a mission for, what do you think flying drones, when do you think drones flying be fully regulated in the UK? Ouch, that's a huge question, a long way off. In terms of partially regulated, it's already arrived. And in fact, as I said, we wouldn't be allowed to pull those stunts that you saw that we were doing in our back garden effectively at the university now. So in terms of, and I assume by fully regulated, you mean mixing it with instrumentation, airspace. That, I would argue, is probably about 1 to 2 decades away. But in terms of invading general aviation space, much, much sooner than that, probably five years away. And I can tell you the GA boys are not happy about that. I'm just going to skim down. And then we might come back to some. There's lots of
Have we lost you, Steve? I can't hear you.
Many apologies.
Yeah.
I'm back.
You're
apologies
back.
There, folks. Great. So yeah, software implementation. Now, this is another, guess what? I've got another talk about this. In other words, are we talking about, I'm going to assume you're talking about DO178C style implementation rather than quality implementation of, DO178 nothing. So people are already making DO178C level A software for drones. You can buy it. But it's, as you can imagine, it won't surprise you to hear, it's eye-wateringly expensive. Yes, the more the merrier in that sense, because it will create the economies of scale that we're used to in any market. So yeah, that's on its way already. Do we inform the CAA for every flight? And the answer is not directly. We have, the CAA have effectively explicitly delegated authority to our own people within the university. So I have to inform the university CAA rep effectively if we're going to go and do a flight. It's very boring, but once you get the system worked out, you just smash off an email and inform them that we're going to go and fly, and we file a flight plan effectively. So it's similar each time. Compared to the Wild West of 3 years ago, it's really, really frustrating, but we can work with the CAA. Yeah, essentially, we've got to do that. The Wild West days are over, and so we're going to have to cooperate more.
And talking about the Wild West, it looks like Gavin there's got is in the counter drone. And thanks all, great presentation. We're actually in the counter drone arena.
100%. Now,
it might be interesting for you two there.
I'm going to say the inevitable. I have a talk about it. So, because I've been heavily involved in counter drone. It won't surprise you to hear that organisations like my dear wife has just bought me a glass of wine because it's 8 o'clock. Thank you very much. And yeah, counter drone is a huge subject. And so at the moment, most counter drone technology is ground based. So is UE doing any research into this area? The answer is yes. In partnership with other organisations in Bristol, and it's pretty obvious which ones we're talking about here. And so what we're trying to do here is decide how we're going to take on current drones. How do we shoot down or incapacitate a DJI Phantom, which is quite a feat of engineering already. The thing that I'm thinking about, particularly as an avionics engineer and as a former conventional aerospace engineer, is how do we counter the tools that we're currently developing? Yikes. So in other words, the arms race has well and truly started. I'm just going to try myself on video again. Hello, folks. Yeah, the arms race is well and truly ahead. So yes, looking at counter UAV and also looking at counter UAV. So you can imagine what we've got at the moment. It's frankly really easy to bring down. The general, you see all these people working on, you see a lot of people working on physical nets and whatnot. I'm a bit of a skeptic for that, for nets. I'm a bit of an electromagnetic pulse guy myself. But then I would say that because I'm IET, aren't I? So that's the sort of attack that I see. The downside of that is that we can harden our vehicles quite quickly against an EMP. And I can also create my drone jinxing out of the way, so I can come up with counter maneuvering. So we're in a situation where it's entirely possible that, you know, we're going to end up with the Battle of Britain. Something looks uncannily like a First World War dogfight in a few years' time. And I'd be really interested to hear, Gavin, whether you think that is likely. But please get in touch, Gavin. We're really interested in this. Please do. Another good one there. Deal with weather, wind, turbulence, and ground effect. Oh, excellent questions. Yeah, wind. Well, it's a. I don't know if you're building your own drone, but oh, thank you, Gavin. The general rule of thumb that we have is that if you're going to have any chance of flying your drone outdoors in any kind of wind, you need to have a ×2 thrust to weight ratio for your vehicle. And in fact, for that interesting unfolding vehicle that you saw, the second version of the flying brick, we've gone for a 3-to-1 thrust to weight ratio. We could get away with that because our props are so efficient now, because we've got those large props. And we're finding that 3-to-1 thrust to weight ratio, it was amazing. We had it flying the other day, and it was a lot gustier at the high altitude we took it up to. Gusty and windy, and it was like it was nailed there, because we got our well-tuned software. We're using Argicopter, I should say, and you're probably familiar with that. So yeah, nothing speaks like a nice low drag airframe and bags of high speed, bags of thrust to weight ratio. Would you have been better to have 3D printed the polystyrene shell with the right weight distribution? An excellent question. Hello, Anonymous. Yeah, the answer is not really, no, because the weight distribution was a drop in the bucket for the airframe weight. Because general rule of thumb that a good half of the airframe of the total takeoff weight is generally a battery most of the time. And so if you want to change the C of G, you just move the battery around, and it has this disproportionate effect. So in fact, trying to fine tune the size of the shell is pretty much a drop in the bucket. It's not worth going there. So the thing can actually be really lopsided before it really makes a difference to the control laws. And in fact, some of my students, they've built some bonkers drones just for the fun of it, which are totally asymmetric, and the control laws can handle it. It's not efficient, but it can still be, it still works. Can you have a YouTube link to the last video? Oh, which one was that? Oh, yes, we will. Well, as soon as we have flight information, if the customer will let us, I will be pushing out YouTube links to that thing flying to anybody who stands still long enough. As you can imagine, we're very eager to promote all our boasting rights. So yes, video coming this way as much as I can. And I certainly hope to give another talk about progress on the second version of the flying brick next year, and all those other crazy projects we're doing. Yeah, so I will try to, Anonymous. Yeah, it hadn't really occurred to me that yeah, there might be some news. Brick Dome project. Yes. Okay, Adam. Yes, I suppose so. Really, I'm delighted that it's generating so much interest. Maybe a blog we could do, because I know the university, we have somebody who is constantly updating our university blog, so I could have a word with her to keep that updated with news of the project. But I have to say, this is just one of several very interesting projects we're working on, so maybe we could do some more of that. What's the average time it takes for a project like monitoring to finished build? Oh, now there's a great question. It can be anything from a year down to the project where, you know, that tilt wing thing that I was showing you earlier, that was the that was the most spectacular aerospace project I have ever worked from. We literally worked from that whiteboard that you saw in the slides to the takeoff, us flying that subscale model. It was a 7-kilo drone. We went in 6 weeks, and I've never seen anything like it. So I'm going to say that 6 weeks is kind of the bare minimum, and that was literally the team working almost day and night, 7 days. So Kevin Wilson, excellent question about the great 250 gram thing. Do we get an academic waiver? That's a really interesting question, because of the work we're doing, where we're working in the commercial, we're doing research projects for commercial organizations. We live in this really strange gray area between academia and commercial. And we've spoken to the CAA about this. And in fact, yes, the CAA have given us an academic waiver depending on the version, depending on the particular project we're working. What it boils down to is how much are you getting paid for this thing. So yes and no. Drone's been used for search and rescue. Yeah, very much so. Oh gosh, there's so many brilliant questions scrolling fast. How do we solve the rigidity issue with the folding arms? Excellent question. Yeah, the bottom line is carbon fiber. Those rods are carbon fiber, and they are pretty much as long as we can make them, and then we go up again. That isn't the rigidity. That isn't where we have the problem in the rigidity in the arms. The problem is actually in the actuator, the hinge at the fuselage. As you can imagine, it's actuating the thing and holding it rigid at the base, rather than with modern carbon fiber. We can get the rigidity we need in the arm itself. The problem is is where it's joined to the fuselage, and then make it articulate. Is the potential a human-powered drone? Hang on. When you say a human-powered drone, we're talking about a helicopter. I'd need more question. I'd need some more detail on that. Tell us about drones walking swarms. Yes, looks like a firework display. Very interesting. Very true. Well, this is an interesting one because swarming has its own technical definition, namely where the behavior of the swarm, excuse me, I'll just have a sip of wine to keep my throat going. A swarm is where it's a peer-to-peer system interacting with a handful of simple rules. So the behavior of the swarm is largely an emergent property of the interactions of these simple rules. So perhaps what you're mainly talking about, and certainly when we see these magnificent firework displays and things like that, these are generally what I would call formations rather than swarms. In other words, they are being orchestrated from a single command system, probably on the ground. I mean, within the formation itself, typically the communications might be mesh network and things like that, but the control is generally being orchestrated. And you think, my God, is it hard to? That must be hard to actually command 1,000 drones in the air. It's not really in principle. It's just engineering to scale that thing up. Effectively, you've got 1,000 instances of a control object. Will Brexit stunt the laws? Oh, don't get me started about Brexit. Brexit is a real problem for us because it has absolutely multiplied the number of regulations that we're potentially going to have to obey. So yes, I think it's not so much Brexit that's the problem as the fact that the Brexit has resulted in effectively the discussion of regulation being devolved to UK, obviously, and in fact I've written some papers about this and contributed to the House of Commons Select Committee on this, and they're dithering. It's hard to say whether the Europeans would dither better or worse. Don't know, but yeah, it's certainly an issue. Absolutely an issue. How are we dealing with aerospace issues? In the simplest case, it's dead easy. We stay under 100 meters. So in other words, we're operating inside CAA regulations. The document that everybody needs to be aware of is a thing called CAP. I can't remember what it stands for. CAP 722. There's probably a lot of people out there are familiar with it. And essentially that's CAA guidelines on flying unmanned aerial vehicles in open space. So if you look at CAP 722, as it's known affectionately, read that, and that will pretty much tell you everything that you're allowed to do and the level of regulation that you need to fly that drone in a given airspace. So it's like all these things under about 100 meters, particularly if you're not being paid, you can still fly your drone, you know, in the local park. Famous 11 questions. How is the bricks aerodynamics tested? Well, it hasn't got any aerodynamics. As I say, the drones in general, and that one in particular, is an insult to an aerodynamics engineer. We always have slightly entertaining conversations with the aero guys in our department. It's not a question of aerodynamics. It's just a question of force factors. And really, it just becomes a question of how much force, at what efficiency can we generate at the center point of those rotors. So, and in order to do that, it's a spreadsheet.
Steve, I think you've frozen again.
Great. I hope I'm back.
Yep,
Am I back there?
You're back now.
Many
Thank you.
thanks. Yeah. So yes. Where was I? Gosh. Oh yes, CFD and testing of aerodynamics. So if you're talking about aerodynamics of rotors, you can do CFD and it doesn't work. So, and also the other thing to understand is that the data sheets released by the propeller and certainly the battery manufacturers for the performance of their kit is lies. So even when you buy that component based on the data sheet that's been put out by the manufacturer, you stick it on a rig straight away and you measure what the efficiency, the number of grams per watt you're getting out of that prop is, and that whole engine, that whole powertrain. So it's not a question of aerodynamics, it's a question of power propulsion, really. Gosh, how much developing using a winch on a drone to lower a pay? You know, I'm so happy that you asked that one, Anonymous, again. There is a project coming your way on exactly that we're looking at. We're hoping that someone will fund it. We've got a bid in, and fingers crossed, we'll watch this space. What's going to make it quite interesting is that the winch will be on the payload, not the drone, because what we were trying to develop there is a capability for a system which can just be hooked to any random drone, and then it can lower itself and could, like a spider on its web, up and down this line. So developing winches on drones is something that a lot of people are interested in for obvious reasons. And the big problem is how do you manage vibration in the line? And so we're doing lots of simulation work on that. But yeah, it's coming to a development project near you in the next few years. Gosh, let me have a look. There's a really good question there about redundancy, Alex. Many thanks. Now that's really interesting because I bore my students absolutely rigid during my courses when I'm banging on about redundancy, and the level of reliability that we need in drones is a huge issue, because again, I've written a paper about this. I should send you the link to it when it's published. But exactly this, the issue you get, because up till now, we've always been talking about manned aircraft. So there's always this overriding imperative with manned aircraft that that we're preserving the life of the people on board. And so the redundancy and the reliability of the vehicle is 100%, well, 99% about preserving the people on board. You take the people out, suddenly you realize that you only need instead of 1 in a billion flight hours between accidents, you can get away with, 1 in 10 hours or something like that. Anything. And it depends on the mission where you're flying. So, for example, a UAV flying over the Pacific could have a really, really low reliability figure. It doesn't need any redundancy at all. Conversely, same UAV, same mission, but over downtown Los Angeles, suddenly things are going to be chock full of common systems, dual redundancy, backup, DO178C certified code, etc., etc. So that's a huge subject. Excellent question, and one that I regularly talk about elsewhere. So, oh gosh, there's so many good stuff. What will be the ceiling on drone technology? Oh, I love that question, because I remember a while back when I was giving a talk, I'm looking for people who are 10 years old now to answer that question for me. How are we going to what will a drone look like in 2120? And for example, what I'd really like to do is get rid of this whole concept of having to push air around. Why can't we, I don't know, interact with the Higgs boson or something? It goes crazy. So there is no ceiling, absolutely. At the moment, we're actually quite heavily limited in the technology that we can perform, and far and away the biggest limiting factor in our capability at the moment is the energy density in a LiPo battery. I've got a very good slide about this, and I'll present it another time. Suffice it to say that we as engineers have been absolutely spoilt rotten for the last 150 years by this stuff called petrol, hydrocarbon gasoline, call it what you will. And that's got about 40 megajoules per kilo of energy per weight. Go to a modern battery, about 1.5 megajoules. It really, there's such a huge gap. So if somebody can come up with a battery that's got similar energy density to an internal combustion engine, but without all the problems of the internal combustion engine, man, it really is going to go bonkers then, because then we can design in all sorts of capabilities, and we can trade that off in all sorts of different directions in terms of reliability, performance, mission capability, all sorts. Gosh, I'm just picking them at random here, folks. These are wonderful questions. I'll be delighted to see them all. I will try and answer more of them.
Are you happy to do another 5 minutes or so?
Very happy to go on if people are interested. Should we go on till past?
past, is that okay? Okay.
If people are still out there and interested, how many people have we got attending still?
We've got 240 still online. I think the maximum of 313, and these are hanging on for your questions. So
thank you very much.
Informative and interesting, and people are still adding questions as we talk. And
they're still streaming in.
I'm just there now. So, but I appreciate it's a big load on you.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it. As I say,
I'll leave you to it then, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, I froze. If you can hear me,
I can hear you.
Oh,
we can hear you.
My video has ceased. Great. So I'm just going to pick some out. Drones for personal transport. That's a huge question. This is this thing of what they call eVTOL that I was talking about. And as I say, there is what I would describe as clear blue water between the sort of reliable regulation without regulation. Oh, we've dropped out.
No, you've come back, actually. I was a bit premature.
Oh,
sorry, I jumped in a bit quick. But I think your screen might have frozen.
It has, yes. Hold on. I'll just, folks, just hold in with me. I'll just see if I'm back. I'll disconnect. Oops. The Q&A box isn't there.
Okay, do you want me to read you some questions?
Oh, I'll just try one more time.
Okay.
Adrian, hold on.
Raymond's made a very good suggestion. Maybe you should stop sharing your desktop while you're answering the questions.
Good, excellent idea. If it lets me. Although I'm not, in the last few weeks, I've become an H.264 streaming expert because I've been writing a load of software. So, Zoom's hanging itself. So what I'll do is, if you can still hear me,
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, great. It's just that the Q&A one has frozen. So I'll look at some of the ones that are on the page before they froze. How to increase the flight time with by consuming, I'm assuming, conserving power in drones. Right, 100%. Your first thing that you need to think about is this disk loading thing that I was talking about earlier, Raja. The until you've got the disk loading down, in other words, the rotor size as big as you can and your airframe weight as low as you can, then all the other improvements in terms of, I don't know, reducing resistance in your wiring and things like that, all of those will just be a drop in the ocean. So it's all about getting that rotor efficiency up, because your battery is just been worked so hard that after the rotor efficiency, the next thing is to make sure that you match the battery. Everybody thinks you just pull a battery off the shelf and start using it. It's absolutely essential that you run your battery as at lower current as possible, because not only will it drain the battery quicker if you over drain the battery too fast, it will actually damage the battery. It can potentially burst into flames. But worse than that, the efficiency falls off a cliff as well. So you'll feel it getting really, really hot. And that's because you're working that battery too hard. So you get into all these crazy situations where you've got too many, you stick more batteries in and then the drone gets heavier, or you take more battery out to reduce the weight, but then that battery's pulling too much current, at which point it absolutely ruins the battery. So those are my first two things, but there's a huge hit list of issues to look at, Raja. Good stuff. So Adrian, if you can pick me a random one, my end, the question and answer session has ceased.
Okay. I guess that's interesting.
Try and choose me one that we were discussing yesterday with Adrian and Julie and I. We were discussing, find a question that is really awkward for me. Something difficult.
A really awkward one. Answering. Gosh.
There's a very good question in the meantime from Jack. Does a single central rotor for lift and edge rotors for stabilization, with lift and edge rotors for stabilization work? In principle, yes. In practice, you've got a whole bunch of tricky things to solve. So the first one is you're going to have some sort of torque compensation. So the way most people do it in the market at the moment is with a contra-rotating fan. And there's all sorts of issues with that as well, and we're using it on some of our stuff. But yes, you can do it, but because you reduce the disk loading is the prize. You end up with a problem in the general arrangement of your vehicle, essentially, because where do you put all these systems? You're going to have to put them in the middle, at which point suddenly you've got a big lump of drone in the middle. But yeah, 100%, you can do it like that with a large central rotor, or you can have it looking a bit like a Chinook, where you've got two contra-rotating rotors, one before the other. So there's entirely doable, and it's all about, as I say, getting that rotor as big as you can to keep that load right down. So go ahead, Adrian.
We got a question here from Trevor. Are drones being used as weather forecasting machines capable of high altitude rather than weather balloons? And if so, how do they deal with the extremes of temperature, and if using a LiPo battery, for instance?
Yeah. Now, they haven't got so far as to be using them. So those sort of high altitude, long endurance vehicles have been looked at. And in fact, if you look in the market, there's all sorts of stuff going on, but it's still at the development phase. And the usual angle that people are taking is they're trying to develop solar powered drones, which can stay up kind of indefinitely. They're limited in the end by the systems degrading and stuff like that, particularly batteries and solar panels clogging up and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, in principle, you can loiter about in high atmosphere almost indefinitely, at which point it's the same issues you have in temperature management. So that you have with any aircraft, you've got to manage your batteries. So you're monitoring the temperature of your battery, and and you're trying to actively cool it or heat it in this case. So ironically, one of the problems we've got, I was saying earlier about that project we were doing for solar farms, and we're looking at hovering a drone over a solar panel in Portugal in August, and you think, hang on, it gets hot down there, doesn't it? And it's a lot hotter directly above a solar panel. So there we're in the much harder problem of how do we cool the battery? But yeah, you can heat the battery all too easily. And so yeah, active management of temperature and things like that is just one of a whole huge myriad of problems you get when you get up to 30,000, 40,000 feet. And those are kind of known, understood problems, because obviously we've been doing that since the beginning of high altitude flight.
So, oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if you look at those machines, they're absolutely vast though. They weigh only about tens of kilos, and they're kind of the size of a tennis court. Because if you look at the physics of how big you need to make a solar panel in order to keep and get the economies of scale you need to stay up there indefinitely, those are the sort of sizes you need. But yeah, people are really interested in it. And guess what? It's the military are interested for reconnaissance as well. But also there was a project by Facebook a couple of years ago, because they're looking at, a lot of people are looking at it for communications as effectively low level geostationary satellites, by having these things just orbiting around, being telephone and internet retransmission points. Really interesting stuff.
Wow. If we can, one last question, which is a very interesting question from Marcus. Have you got any thoughts, comments to the Mars helicopter currently on its way to Mars? The control laws would need to consider different gravity, air density, temperatures, etc.
That is the most magnificent project. And I'll be crossing my fingers really hard when that thing takes off. In fact, the whole issue of flying in low G planets has been looked at by, ironically, biologists, because people have been looking at the physics of and the maths of how to do flight in thin atmospheres and low G, which is exactly what Mars is. So in that sense, as long as you know the atmospheric density and you know the gravity, yeah, you calculate your drone your disk size that you need for a given energy consumption. And in that sense, from a physics point of view, it's fairly trivial in the sense that, you know, it's a spreadsheet filled in on day one. The problem they've got is one of engineering. I mean, it's an absolute miracle of systems engineering to be able to fold that thing up, stuff it into a spaceship, blast it through space, and then get it down onto the surface of the planet. I mean, it's an absolute miracle of engineering just to do the rover. So if they can get that thing to take off on Mars, it really will be quite spectacular. But yeah, from a maths point of view, it's doable. It's just an absolute mountain to climb in terms of systems engineering. Good question. Oh, go on. Let's just have one more then, Adrian. You got
one more. Is it lightweight drone? Where would drones be helping in reducing this? Let's have a look here. So where could drones be helpful in reducing risks to people? Maybe working at heights, painting the fourth bridge.
Yeah.
Or is some of that too far? And or placing things on ceilings, I guess light bulbs and things.
Yeah,
I think another 100%. Question. There's quite a few around this. Yeah.
Well, this is exactly what I was talking about during the talk. You remember I was saying.
I think we might have lost you again, Steve.
Hi.
Am I back? You're back.
Great,
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is a really good one to finish on, actually, Adrian. Thank you, because this is something that's cropping up all the time, and this is what I regard as being the next wave of drone use. As I say, up till now we've been looking at things and being quite passive. We're sort of semi-active now, where we're spraying and cleaning things, and even those applications are quite few and far between. But where it's going to get really interesting, the way I always describe it is whenever I'm walking down the street and I see either a piece of scaffolding or a cherry picker. Sorry for people outside the UK, that's one of those platforms on a hydraulic arm machine that you see at building sites and things. Whenever I see a cherry picker or scaffolding, I think, right, what can we get a drone to do that job? It's whenever we're working at height. And so, as I say, I showed you that that picture of me working on the wind turbine here in the back garden earlier. And every time I work on it, I think, yeah, this is a job for a robot, or an airborne robot, dead easy. I shouldn't be having to bring this thing to the ground. And so let me finish. In that case, that's a really nice opportunity to finish with an interesting engineering challenge that I could give you. And this is from actually one of my students who worked on a building site before he came to me. Very, very bright lad. And he pointed out that if you can make a flying robot that can get a rusty bolt off a piece of rusty old steel girder, if you can get a rusty bolt off, you're going to make a fortune, because that is an absolute pig of a job of trying to because by definition, that bolt is rusty because it's in such an awkward place. And so if you can drill that out, and putting the new bolt in afterwards, as you can imagine, dead easy. And if you can do that, you can, and it doesn't take much imagination to realize that if you can do something as trivial as that, apparently trivial, then you can do all sorts of other wonderful missions as well, and absolutely change the world. I mean, my dream project is I want to build a house using drones. And when you start to think about it, you wouldn't build it a brick at a time. You build it a teaspoon at a time. Just leave you that thought to finish with, folks.
Gosh, thank you. Wow. Yeah, that's taking it quite to an extreme, isn't it? Gosh.
Exactly. But let your imagination roam wild.
Thank you, Steve. I think you've answered over 40 questions, so that's remarkable in itself, apart from giving us a really informative talk. So that takes us to the end of our questions and also to the end of our webinar tonight. Thank you. Before we thank our speaker, I would like to say thank you to all those for registering and joining with us tonight from all over the world. Our first, Devon and Cornwall's first webinar. And for the many, many questions we received, I think we've probably received 80 odd questions. We hope you've enjoyed the IET webinar tonight. I certainly have, and learned a lot. We will be organising more webinars in the foreseeable future, and we hope to see you again. If any attendees in the Devon and Cornwall area of England would like to get involved, volunteer for committee work, or indeed provide a webinar, please do get in touch. And with that said, the domestics, it just remains for me to say a big, big thank you on behalf of the attendees tonight and the IET to Dr. Steve Wright for providing us such an interesting and informative talk.
Many thanks, guys.
It's a topic that not only interests and excites and brings together all age groups and disciplines, but it's also so diverse in its application, and I believe can hugely positively benefit the world we live in. We hear so many negatives, but this is a huge area with all these positives we've heard tonight of the good things it can do for the population effectively, and the vast range of applications they're not only already used in, but where they could be applied with these interesting questions we've had tonight and things, the rusty bolts that we'd never think of or spraying. So there's a lot of good to come from these. So finally, Steve, thank you. A great talk and greatly appreciated. Thank you. Thank you for putting this on tonight. Thank you, audience.
Very good. I'm thrilled that so many people have been interested in this. And please get in touch. As you can see, it's something I'm utterly passionate about. And very nice to speak to you tonight. Good evening.
Thank you. So good night all. Please all keep safe. And thank you so much for attending our webinar tonight. Much appreciated. Thank you, Steve. Goodbye all. See you again soon. Bye-bye.